Hello everyone and welcome to this Strength2Food webinar. It's great to host this webinar on World Intellectual Property Day because geographical indications are an important form of intellectual property, and it's something which we've been looking at as part of the Strength2Food project. Strength2Food is a 5-year integrated research and innovation project funded by the European Union. I'm very pleased and delighted to introduce our speakers today, which are looking at some of the public benefits which may emerge from food quality schemes. I'd like you to welcome to the seminar and hope you enjoy it as well. Thank you for joining us.
Okay. Thank you to everybody to join to this seminar that is the last one of the last step of the Strength2Food project, as Matthew mentioned before. So I would like to share our final work that we stress. We try to synthesize many work done so far and our research on food quality scheme and the relation between the food quality scheme and sustainability. This work, of course, comes from the work from all the colleagues of the Strength2Food consortia, but in particular it was made by myself and my colleague Marianna Guareschi, that you will see in a few minutes, and Maria Cecilia Mancini and Gianluca Morelli. Okay, I will start from what we call the theoretical background that have allowed us to define a strategic guide on food quality scheme. Of course, this guide is not the first one. There are the other guides that come from previous research, like the FAO guide on linking people, place, and product, a guide even from FAO, from geographical indication for sustainable food system, and another one straining the sustainable food system through geographical indication. But this guide, the new guide that we are going to present, will focus on externalities and public goods generated by the application of the code of practice of food quality scheme. So for the main aspect that has drive us in our research was the concept of sustainability, where sustainability is defined by was defined by the FAO Council in the end of 80th year, and they stress that sustainability is based on the 3 dimensions: economic, environment, and social. But this concept is renewed according to Agenda 2030, where are set 17 sustainable development goals. Well, if you see these 17 goals, we can see that 14 are strictly related with agriculture, and they are most of them considered and presented as a public good from the activity generated by food quality scheme. So our idea is really to show up this link because in geographical indication, more than other food quality scheme are dealing with the concept of quality and their perception by consumer, the rural areas and the characteristics of the production system in its ability to provide unique characteristics to qualify and manage food production, and then the food value chains that in its ability to deliver value added to the producer. We can say that quality and is very rooted in the region. And from this region, the value chain became the active component that deliver product, but also value to the producer and to the consumer. In some way, we can say that sustainability of the value chain or the supply chain became the element to generate a rural sustainability or rural in a rural environment. Well, this concept is were applied in a logical framework that we present in this slide, where we can see the territorial dimension and the value chain, where of course we can see that different value chain can be active at the same moment, and so we can have a local to local value chain, local to domestic value chain, and local to global value chain, and that generate different type of impact on a territorial level, and this impact concern the economic dimension, the social dimension, and the environmental dimension. So these three dimensions of sustainability are captured and are observed in the framework of a territorial scheme. So the concept of a local agri-food system became the most important environment where appreciated the impact of that. So in the case of Strength2Food, we have observed that the sustainability of GI system in using indicator that was taken in the logic from SAFA, but then was improved in considering specific approach to assess their value, their quantitative value in economic, environment, and social dimension. And we have considered this indicator in the logic of the value chain and in the logic of a territory. But we can see that there are other elements that are related to the food quality scheme and are what we call public good, where public good are considered the pure externalities in some cases, and these public good act on the preservation of the quality, avoiding unfair competition, increasing reputation of the territory, facilitating relationship among the stakeholders, reducing transaction cost, increasing value of the output by rising the firm reputation, facilitating the marketing of local products, preserve local knowledge and cultural heritage, and preserve local biodiversity. All these public good has effect in the local development in different dimensions. In one that is an environmental dimension by the preservation of natural resources, in another in the social dimension, improving the quality of life in rural areas, and the giving or increasing the resilience of producer. And then we have also positive effect on the health of the consumer. So we can see that the indicator for a sexy sustainability, sustainable food quality scheme, we can synthesize using this slide where we have the generation of different type of good by the activity of geographical indication, and those are private good, public good, and mixed good. But they are related to a more general meaning because they are related to the presence of a legal framework that is the European law on geographical indication and an international rule that protect geographical indication. We have a governance structure related to the activity of GI group and the code of practice that are or represent, they represent the rule that producers apply in their specific environment and the local agricultural system in order to produce sustainable GI. And so we have an implication for sustainability that can be assessed by quantitative indicator or by the experience and then good practice available and observed from the activities of GI producer. So we can see that our guide is just as the aim to observe what are the link between the code of practice and the generation of public good. And so, and that is the first action of the guide. Then we try to understand the determinants of the generation of public good and how to manage the public good and enhance public good over time. And these three elements are part of the activity of our guide based on the previous setting, given the condition of activity in a local agri-food system. Of course, there are other two elements that is understanding the stakeholder commitment to generating public good and the feasibility of public good, of good practice that generate public goods that are out of the action of the guide, but are led to the governance structure to take in consideration and apply. So I will stop here. I will let the floor to my colleague Marianna Guareschi that will go through the structure of the guide.
Yeah, thank you, Filippo. Good morning, everyone. As Filippo introduced, I will speak about the logic and the structure of the guide. And first of all, I would like to remember just the framework in which the guide has been developed. As we have already seen, the guide is developing the framework of the European Horizon 2020 Strength2Food project, which is aimed at assess the sustainability of the food quality scheme products using sustainable indicators that focus on the economic dimension, environmental dimension, and social dimension. So in this framework, a work package was focused on the relationship between the food quality scheme and the public goods. Which means that we try to analyze how the food quality scheme can produce the public goods linked to good production and consumption practices. And specifically, this guide tried to explore and analyze the public goods produced by food quality scheme that are the externality which are not directly visible to consumer and are not economically valued. So the guide presents several good practices adopted within the GI's production system and classifies the good practices according to the public goods generated within the corresponding labs. In this guide, we analyze just the food quality system, the PDO product and PGI product, and we didn't analyze organic product. And we try to identify the type and characteristic of the public goods generated by the production system. We try to identify the driving factor known as determinants that generate public goods and how public goods can be managed and valorized over time. We did it analyzing 16 products that are European and not European products, and collect good practices, analyzing their good the code of practice or the practices that are implemented in the value chain. So the guide is organized in 4 main chapters. The first one is oriented to go deep in the theoretical framework. That is the theoretical framework that Filippo explained before. The second chapter try to analyze the lesson learned from the assessment that we did in the Strength2Food project. And the third chapter is more focused on the learning from practice dimension. So we try to to make a comparative analysis of sustainability among food quality scheme, and to extract some case message. And the last chapter is a recommendation for action. So we try to extract some recommendation for stakeholders that are involved in the production of food quality scheme, and they want to manage and enhance public goods production. So in this presentation, I would like to focus a little bit about the last 2 chapters, so the learning from practice. First of all, just to quickly explain to you how we did this analysis, so which methodology we use. We try to identify 3 main classes of public goods respecting the 3 dimensions of sustainability. So we identify the cultural heritage preservation, socioeconomic, and the use of natural resources. For each of these class of public goods, we try to identify some determinants, drivers, and we did it analyzing the code of practice and trying to understand which were the practices that in the different value chains were used, implemented, that could produce public good. So for example, for cultural heritage preservation, we identified the link with territory, communication and valorization, the respect of the qualitative and traditional aspects, the generational change, the profit to labor ratio, and support tourist events. We also use the SAFA methodology to try to create a correspondence among our indicator, our drivers, and the SAFA indicator for sustainability assessment. So for each determinant, for example, you can see this table which presents the determinants of the cultural heritage preservation. We identify some practices, some elements that are useful for the management and valorization of a public good. And for each elements, we formulated questions that we try to answer analyzing the code of practice. So for example, in this case, I will focus on the communication and valorization determinants, and specifically in the external communication strategy. And the question was, which good practices the consortium or companies use to generate an external communication strategies that encourage an economic sustainability. I'll just take here some example to make you understand how the guide is structured, but you can find all the information in the guide. For example, for the Sobresada de Mallorca, that's a current sausage from Spain, we can understand that it's very important to have a collaborative approach in creating and spread information about the quality of the product. For example, in this case, the consortium prepared pamphlets for school students and publish a book of recipes, and this had a good impact on raise people's level of identification, encourage local consumption, and show a versatility of product cooking. In the socioeconomic dimension, I will just focus on the economic spillover, so how the value chain can have an impact in local economy, which is its contribution for the local economy. And in this case, I will show you the case of Parmigiano Reggiano that has a great impact on all the area. And that is because the code of practice gives some regulation that makes that forage and milk as its origin in the area of production. And so production, ripening, cutting, and packaging take place within the local area. And that's created a nice excellent cluster for the supply chain in all the region. The last example for the use of natural resources category, I focus on the animal welfare. So we consider both animal health and animal freedom from stress. So here the question is, how the code of practice include and guarantee respect for animal welfare aspect in terms of animal health and animal stress on freedom. And I put here some example from the case of Comté cheese from France and the Goulet sausage from Hungary. And in this case, the regulation, the code of practice has an animal regulation that suggests to make that animal can live more the time outside. There is a regulation that don't allow the fermented fodder or GMOs, and there are measures to avoid or maximize the animal minimize the animal anxiety and suffering. So this pay attention on the life of the animal and animal welfare in general. So from this kind of analysis of qualitative good practice, we try to extract some recommendations for action. For example, about the cultural heritage preservation, we identify the importance of developing relationship, technical, commercial, and social along the supply chain at territorial level, creating a sense of belonging and identity that links producer to the territory, communicating the cultural, historical, and traditional characteristics of the product, organizing the educational and training activities that encourage generational change, organize cultural, touristic, and promotional events, monitoring the minimum and maximum profitability of the process. In this presentation, I will just focus on the third element, so the communication of the cultural, historical, and traditional characteristic of the product. So, for example, from the good practices and the case studies, we notice the importance of communicate the characteristic and effect generated by public goods as an important aspect to increase consumer awareness of the real quality attributes linked to the GI food product. And the communication process must take place both within the supply chain and between the supply chain and the consumer or citizen inside and outside the production area. About the socioeconomic dimension, we highlight the importance of using a collective and participatory approach, avoid the concentration of economic and decision-making power, developing governance action in the management of the supply chain and market, developing external governance action to create networks with private and public institutions, and consider the gender equality in decision-making process and economic parity. So in this case, about, for example, the fourth point, that concerned the developing governance action, we notice the importance of create a governance system to the generation, communication, and enhancement of public goods linked to GI products. And this governance system required a coordinated action among all the actors of the supply chain in collaboration with the local stakeholder. Finally, about the use of natural resources, we highlight the importance of adopting technology without upsetting natural balances, creating a balance between technology and traditional practices to preserve natural resources, landscape, biodiversity. Adaptive extensive production system in both livestock and agriculture to maintain the presence of labor and to respect the biophysical limits of the environment, developing research system for monitoring and development to respect sustainable issues, and finally to communicate the characteristic of environmental public goods and the benefit from the territory and citizens. So in this case, just I'll enter in the third point. So developing research systems. So we understood that it's very important to support the value change by a research system that can favor the analysis and the monitoring of environmental sustainability and study potential innovation. So it's important to create in the value chain a network of research centers, university, and public and private institutions that can work on this kind of research. So this guide was created to present, as I told you, good practices that can represent example. And in the guide, you will find just some example. We report some example from some products, but we analyzed and we have a database in which you can find all the good practices that all the products that we analyzed present. And this can be important because we think that each consortium or association or producer can accede to these good practices, analyze it, and adapt these good practices in their different contexts. So it's a way to maintain a dialogue, and that can be rich for all the stakeholders that are interested in these issues. So I will just show you a little bit the database. So you can find the database to this link. Here you can find two options. Okay, two options. So we can start analyzing and compare products, for example, from the category or from the class of public good. For example, we start from category. So I would like to compare good practices that dairy products implement to increase a socioeconomic public good. So, for example, I will check dairy product. I select the single product. Okay. Comté cheese, Parmigiano Reggiano, Signicat cheese. And I select the class of public good that I want to analyze. For example, socioeconomic. So socioeconomic for Comté cheese, socioeconomic for Parmigiano Reggiano cheese, and socioeconomic for Signicat cheese. And I will choose a determinant, in this case, for example, economic spillover for all the three products. The management and valorization element is the local economic contribution that we have already seen before. And I will select the question. In this case, there is just one question, so I select the same question for all the products. And I will have the answer. So I can compare for the same answer, from the same question, the three answers for the three products. That's just an example. I go back. I can send this. I can do the same starting from the public good. For example, socioeconomic public good. I would like to select the category, so the same dairy, the free product, the determinant, and the question. And I will obtain the same table. So you can use it to compare different products from the same category, different kind of answer, different public good elements, and have some input that you can introduce in your own value chain, or have contact with the other consortia and open dialogue about it. I think I said everything. So, thank you.
Thanks, Mariana. So now we're moving to our stakeholder speakers. And I'd first of all like to introduce Riccardo Deserti from Parmigiano Reggiano. So thank you, Riccardo, for joining us.
So some consideration about the project. And I try from the point of view of the GIs and not only of Parmigiano Reggiano that was involved in the project to try to put some vision for the future. The starting point is a consideration about the role of sustainability now in the food system, because the role, the priority of sustainability is increasing not only for the real target to increase the sustainability of the role of agricultural and food production for the future of our world, but this topic become also a marketing priority. A lot of product, a lot of companies around the world are looking to this topic primarily as a tool to increase sales by the way of sustainability. And not for all, the sustainability is a real target. So in this approach, marketing approach, the GIs has a different point of view, because the consumer, first of all, consider a higher expectation in terms of sustainability at the moment, at the starting point, higher than the other product, because the GIs establish their relevance and their brand position during decades of years. And so we have the responsibility as GIs in this perspective to ensure an adequate and quick answer to these needs. We are obliged to drive the system looking to the long term. The private products, the private companies can today work on sustainability and in a couple of years change the priority. We can remember that 2 or 3 years ago, the palm oil was the main target. Now is not yet a real priority target. The new priority is sustainability. So concluding, in the perspective of GIs, sustainability must be driven in the long term. And in my opinion, the role of Strength2Food project is that show exactly the complexity of the topic, but also the possible way to drive for the future of GIs, which will be the next steps in this approach. As GIs, we need to build a unique code of sustainability. We need to share with political side and producer side a framework with the official definition of the complexity of sustainability. So, 2 different levels. We need a tool to summarize this complexity in a few indicators, and Strength2Food try to put a real effort in this way, but we need to share with the political side and producer side, and we need to summarize as show this indicator, because we need to some indicator can useful to communicate to the stakeholder and consumer, because sustainability cannot be only a name, but we need to fill with content. So we also need to build a flexible tool, this tool of sustainability, because different sector and chain are different in the breeder side, in the vegetable side, and other food products. So this is my opinion, and also in the perspective of GIs, the vision for the next steps, starting from the work of Strength2Food. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much. Matt, are you here? If not, we just give the word to Julia from Arepo.
Thank you, Carlos, and thank you, everyone, for inviting me, and thank you for assisting to this event. I'm really happy to participate to the launch of the guide today, and I would like to share with you 2 main messages, 2 reflections. First of all, why we believe that the guide is really a great instrument for an association also like Arepo, and secondly, why it's also important in the framework of the new EU policy that are developing now concerning farm to fork strategy. As Carlos said before, I represent AREPO, which is the Association of European Region for Product of Origin. And we represent 33 regions and their GI producers from 8 different member states. And we cover more than 50% of EU registered geographical indication. And in particular, our members share the vision that geographical indication are important tools for rural development and also territorial planning. And why I'm telling you that, to explain you that for us the result of Strength2Food project, and in particular this strategic guide on GIs and public goods, are not only relevant, but I would say are really a fundamental instrument for our work. As it was said before in the presentation, the guide highlights the important contribution of geographical indication in terms of public good creations. That means that geographical indication have a positive effect not only for producers, which is of course an important element of EU quality schemes, but also for the society as a whole, thanks to the positive spillover effect. In fact, the guide contains example of good practices for the territories, which is why it represents really a perfect tool for our member regions to help GI producers strengthening their contribution to public good creation and territorial development. So secondly, I would like to share, to recall the importance of this work also in light of the current EU policy development related to the Green Deal and Farm to Fork strategy. As you know, Farm to Fork is the EU framework for a transition toward EU sustainable food system, and GI are part of this strategy. As the European Commission recognizes their importance in reinforcing the position of producers inside the supply chain, and also their contribution in terms of sustainable production. In this sense, the guide is fundamental on the one hand to demonstrate that GI's contribution to public good creation is not only potential, but in fact it does already exist, and we have the example and the database which demonstrate that. And on the other hand, the guide represents a practical tool that can be used to unlock further potential thanks to the recommendation developed, and so to increase GI contribution to sustainable production just in line with Farm to Fork objectives. So to conclude, I would really like to congratulate you for this important work, and also to give you our availability in trying to disseminate the work, and maybe why not also organize further event to discuss and present the guide to our members to assure a great uptake of this instrument that we believe is really a great instrument. Thank you again for inviting me and for your attention, and have a nice continuation of the webinar.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you to all of our speakers for the great and insightful presentations. We can open the floor to questions now. So the first question is by Blandine Camus, and Blandine is asking if the indicators focused only on GIs or on all food quality schemes. And also, Blandine would like to know, did you find any particularity regarding the optional quality term mountain product, which is actively used in 8 member states? So perhaps Marianna and Filippo would like to address this.
Yes, okay. We have considered at the moment for only the GI and not the organic production, simply because in the GI system it was much more easy to define the constraint or the limit surrounding the GI's scheme in terms of territorial dimension and the definition of what is the local agri-food system. In the GI, the definition of a territory or the area of production is very clear. Instead, in the organic, there is not this type of information. So, in addition, the governance action of the GIs is very clear, and so in the end, concluding the analysis of what are the impacts at territorial level is much more precise for the GI compared with the organic one. So for this reason, we set and we analyze only the GI. But of course, we hope that we believe that methodology works also for the organic if in a territorial dimension can be defined what is the territory and if there are some governance structure of the system. The second part of the question related to the mountain product, of course, in the GI scheme that we have analyzed, there are also some products that come from the mountain. For the light of the research of Strength2Food project that was 16 GI was quite complex, and even if the researching field took around 2 years, was some differences in the analysis of the impact was defined, was found considering both private good and public good. In the guide, we just observe and we analyze what are the stake defined by different code of practice, and we have tried to organize these rules compared with the determinants that are generated by them. So we recognize that this is the first step of the research, and doing so far and carry out this research, we understood that we need other 5 years of funding to increase our skill and to increase our field of activities.
Thank you,
okay.
Filippo. We have another question from Francois Casabianca that I will summarize. So Francois highlights 2 issues in the relationship between GIs and sustainable development. And these issues are, on one side, the high level of specialization that increases the vulnerability of the territory and also reduces resilience. And the second issue is the market orientation that gives priority to profit and so reduces the access to products to people with low incomes. So Francois wanted to know if you address these important gaps in your work.
Yes, these questions are crucial, and I think that actually are the question that the GI manager or the manager of GI scheme should have a very clear in their mind. In the Strength2Food project, in the quantitative part of the research, we actually try to observe exactly what Francois observed. And we said that we did this type of research, but in order to give a very complete answer, we needed two terms of references. And we did so only for some case study, for instance, on the Parmigiano Reggiano, where we collect additional information and we compared and we observed the evolution of the Parmigiano Reggiano local agri-food system along the time under the pressure that is, as Francois says, is a marketing pressure, but is also a technological pressure and sociological pressure. Technological because there is a lot of innovation that are introduced, and this innovation became the reason and or give a solution to the social problem of farmers that get older and they have a very short family and they maybe want to leave the sector. So and we observe the evolution, and actually our goal was to test if our approach was able to catch and find the reason of the evolution and how to act. And of course, we in that case we really appreciate the size of this phenomena, and we appreciate what was the reason. And of course, we saw that in the time the strategy of the consortia was changing, in which way, modifying their code of practice. And even for this reason, we put our energy in the analysis of the code of practice. But for most of them, we observe only, let's say, the present or the observed code of practice. We didn't observe the evolution of the code of practice over the time in order to manage or contrast or enhance some type of problem or to find a solution to some type of problem that was, as Francois said, reducing or the quality on the effectiveness of the GI system to protect the product on the market and to be a reason of a rural development action in their specific region. In this sense, the aim of the guide is really to show up good practice that each manager of a GI system can evaluate and consider in their specific environment. We are sure that some of them are not useful for each or all GI products because they need to be adapted, but can be an inspiration to adapt or to include this or the experience of other producers to some specific context.
Thank you, Filippo. These are really important points that are being touched upon. So the next question is from Claire Bernard, and I will again summarize it. Claire would like to know, she's also raising very important points. She would like to know who will be accountable for the delivery of public goods and who will set the sustainability targets and at what scale, and also who will finance the monitoring. And more specifically, she would like to know if you recommend to internalize, do you recommend to internalize this cost in already existing cost of control supported by the GIs? quite long question.
Yes. Okay. Yes, of course. That is really the point. As Riccardo Deserti pointed out, I think that there should be just one method that GI producer at the European level should agree on one approach to assess. And actually, I think that of course, this is expensive activities, and because some work must be done, and the people who work must be paid. And but the good news, at least to me, is that there are already many information on the economic side, on the territorial side, on the efficiency of the system, on the environmental side, and this information must be collected and then communicated. So what is important to do is to simply to act and go in this direction, and of course will be an additional cost. That maybe, I don't know, that is my proposal, that for the beginning the Commission can maybe support the organization and take part of this cost, and because actually is especially for a small producer or for small GI, and because the impact on the implication is that as we saw before, GI produce public externalities, and they are doing for free at the moment. So of course they don't want to be paid for that, but at least that there should be a small contribution in order to reduce the certification cost that they have in order to prove and to maintain the quality of their product. That actually is this information, I'm sure, is not or is not only for the consumer, but the most important is for the manager of the GI system in order to continue to preserve the quality and to contribute to the rural development of the regions.
Thank you, Filippo. We probably have time for one last question, and maybe Riccardo could address the last question, because it's quite related to what Riccardo was saying before about this idea of conveying a message of complexity to consumers. So the question is from Roberto Enke, and Roberto would like to know, do you think of the possibility of gaining a sustainability certification that synthesizes the 3 dimensions of sustainability? And would that help the acknowledgement of quality in food? So Riccardo, if you would like to address this last question.
I agree with Roberto, but we need to define and agree which will be the certification system. If we speak about GIs, we have already a certification system. The question is, or for the future, will be able the same certification body to ensure this kind of certification, but we need certainly a kind of certification system that should be also apart from the GI certification, if the contents and the kind of complexity. To express better my opinion, we are now involved in the animal welfare topic at European level and in Italy, but overall in Europe, we are taking account the relevance of a unique system. In Italy, the Cremba system is a kind of algorithm that put different criteria in a final number that show and can allow to the measure of the animal welfare. So we need some approach of a similar approach, and we need to share together the better way inside or outside the GI specification.
Thank you, Riccardo, and thank you to all our speakers who've attended this seminar today. Thank you for joining us. If you would like a copy of the guide, then that is available on the Strength2Food website with an accompanying press release to mark World Intellectual Property Day. And also in future, all those people who have registered for this webinar will receive an email with a link to the database, so you'll be able to play around with it, and also a link to the recording of this webinar. So if there's things which you'd like to go over and see Filippo and Mariana's presentation again, you'll be able to do so. So I'd like to thank everyone for attending this webinar. I hope you found it interesting and insightful, and thank you very much for joining us. Goodbye.